So, Tom, I want you to tell me, because I was talking to my dad about the family story and how he connects to it. And so tell me about where you grew up and your mom and dad.
Well, I grew up in Fall River, and and Dad was from Tiverton, but when I was a little boy, he was living in Fall River after he married my mother, who had been divorced. So my brother was 5 years older than me, but when I was a little boy, we were living in a house on Madison Street, which is above the hill, as they said in Fall River. And we were there for a few years, and then we moved to a three-decker apartment, tenement on Madison Street, but it was about 5 blocks in another direction. And they lived there for about 40 years.
And your mom had been married before and had Dick.
Yeah.
And then she got divorced. And then how did she meet your dad?
Well, my brother was born in 1920, so I think she got married like in 1919, I'm not sure. That part of the history was always non-communicated to us. My brother didn't know he had been adopted until he went to get his license to drive. Okay, that gives you an idea of how society worked.
He thought that Jim Cottrell, your dad, was his father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, of course, he always was, as far as Dick was concerned.
Right.
But his name was Brainan, and so he had, I don't know when he left. I think a lot of times Grandpa put people in business to help him out. Whether he did that with this guy or not, I don't know. But the word was never mentioned, hardly.
That was your mom's father who had the store, when you say business.
Yeah, your grandfather, Thompson.
Right. And what about Jim Cottrell? He had Cottrell Paper back then too?
Oh, no, my father was an insurance salesman. And right after I was born, my uncle Frank, my father's brother Frank, older brother, he was working for a paper company in Connecticut, and they were making what they call a shoe board, which is a very rough board, fits in the bottom of your shoe. So he came to my father and his father, my grandpa Cottrell, he said, I think I can make this product, and they're starting to get into the electrical business and motor insulation. So the three of them got together, and I don't know, and he went up, bought this little mill in Rock City Falls, moved his family up there, and one of my father's sister's husband was an engineer for the Menhaden for the fishing company. He went up to help Frank with the mechanics of machinery. So he spent quite a time. Yeah, he went up there for forever. So the thing got going in 1926. And really, I don't think they made any money at all till maybe 1940 or something. So the reason my father had to stay here and to keep his business going, so he and Grandpa could kind of feed Frank enough money to stay alive. And there was some business, but not, it finally grew. So when I got into business in 1948, it has been pretty well structured. One of Frank's nephews, Francis Harrington, who was a graduate of Worcester Polytech, he was the manager, and my cousin Jim, who was Frank's son, he was in the mechanics of the mill, and Frank's son-in-law, who married one of my cousins, he was the superintendent, and Charlie, who had been up there, was a mechanic. So it was all family oriented. And Jimmy, my cousin Jimmy, he was at Worcester Academy a couple of years with me, and when he left Worcester, he just went back to the mill. He hated being out of Rock City Falls, and he never went anywhere else. But he was in charge of making sure everything worked, and so they worked together. It was quite a setup.
Did they have the hydroelectric plant
No.
and the mill together, or did that come later?
No, that came a lot later. In fact, that came. We were doing pretty well. We had bought that little mill on the Hudson, and that was a water-powered mill that was making things like egg cottons, that rough. But they were beating up whatever they could get. And I think they were using rags the same as we did. Now rags, we will call rags. Well, they weren't old rags. They were new cuttings, cotton. We used mostly cotton from the denim people, because they used the strongest fibered, the longest fibered cotton. Was the strongest, made the best paper. So, but we had that little mill running, and it was all water power. And then I think it was in the late 60s, the company came to us. They were doing, there was some good deals going about hydropower. So they said, we looked this site over, and we feel that we can create XYZ amount of power if we have this site. So we would buy this site from you. And we found out later that the reason they wanted it was an Indian deed. So we had the rights to the bottom of the river. So we sold them that mill after we figured out that we could do all our own pulping. We were using it as a pulp mill for ourselves, but that meant transporting it and all that stuff. And so then they gave us half of the project. That was what they paid us. That's the way they paid us. So they tore that old mill down when they eventually put the hydro plant in. It was actually on the other side of the river, but there wasn't the river was not that wide there, and there was a canal that went around the mill anyways. That they used to barge down newsprint from Canada to New York on that canal. So we had, when we got involved with that project, Ben was just started working with the mill. This was like maybe 25 years ago. So we knew what was going on. That was his job, was to go over and see the daily thing and what they were pushing and pulling. So they put a 50-foot hole in the bottom of the river to get that more power from the water. And so it was supposed to be like a self-drive. It was all geared so that in Rock City Falls we could find out what the speeds were and electronically. But the alarm bell went off so often. Ben almost spent half his life. Usually the bell rang at night, so he had the job of. But he really knew the project. And but then now that's done, it's all done professionally. They have a company. That's all they do is maintain power plants. And these people had built one down near Albany, and they built a big one out west in western New York. And they've done very well.
Wow.
And it's been good to me. Now, what we did is take our shares of Cottrell paper and take that percentage of our half of of the project. So I ended up with 13% of that hydro project, which wasn't bad.
Yeah, that's great.
And
that's just ongoing, right?
Well, it's made my life a lot easier. But it's a partnership, so you never know when all of a sudden the bell rings the other way. But so far it hasn't, and it's been about 25 years and these things have happened. You know, we have bearings wear out, and it's expensive to run. If it's running, it's great, and of course if the water's high, it's better. And last year the water was running well, so my income was a little better. But the big problem with that is, the more you get, the more you pay to the government.
Yeah.
They made sure of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So everyone said, "Oh, geez, it'd be great to have $1 million." Yeah, well, you could consider 400,000 of it's going back to the mill. So.
Well, let me go back to so you're growing up in Fall River, right? And you're who's involved with the store at this point in your family?
Well, Grandpa and Mr. Mills, who is the Prescott's great-grandfather, they were working for Mr. McClure's back in the 1880s and 90s. And Mr. McClure died when he was a young man.
And just to back up, so Grandpa, his father was the whaler, right?
Yeah, his father was the whaler.
And had originally settled in Fall River.
And ended up in Fall River, yeah.
Just tell me about the end of his. And did you ever meet his father, your
Oh,
great
no.
grandfather?
His father died in 1916. He was, I think he came over 1847 with his mother and father. Mother died on the boat. Father came over with my great-grandfather. I think he had a couple of sisters.
And this is Richard Turner Thompson.
He's Richard Turner Thompson. He got into New Bedford, I guess, somehow, and signed on a whaler as a cabin boy, I think, just to get, I think the father said, "Hey, we got to find a place for you." Because I heard the father went back home after he deposited the kids. There was a lot of haziness in this that nobody ever really researched. But I do know, I've got, I think I've showed you his bio. And he was on like 3 or 4 different whalers. And the last one he was on was the one that Cook had tried to kill all of them, and he was the only one that lived. Now he was, I think, a second mate, but with enough knowledge, and it's always amazing to me, a kid can come off the street as a cabin boy, 0 as far as knowledge, and then he brought back a ship from South America to New Bedford as captain. Now, he had to have learned how to navigate. Running people, he knew how that, because he'd been run by his people. But he had to know how to get home.
Yeah.
And that's not a walk across the park. Well, it's a long haul in a lot of ocean. And so he got here. And that's why you can be a descendant. Your father is as a crew member, really, but not as a captain. You had to be a captain when you left New Bedford to be called a captain. Coming back as a captain didn't make any difference. But that was his last whaler. And I have a certificate with that trip. I showed you that. And I've got his little kit of oddball stuff. And then after the war started in '61, he went to the Navy and said, I have this qualifications, and I'd like to get a commission to run one of your ships. Well, they ignore that kind of knowledge. So he sort of turned around and joined the Navy. Just joined the Navy. The hell with it. So he served in the Navy, and he was, the last I heard, he was on a gun crew. I've got a picture of that. And then I have his discharge when he got out.
Where was he based?
Well, he was in from probably a couple of years. He was, that whaling trip was like 1853, and I don't think he came back probably for another 3 or 4 years into New Bedford. And then he did a couple of local trips, freighters, three-masted stuff. And then when the war started, 61, I don't know when he went in, but he got out right near the end of it. And he'd been, I think, I got a clipping about, there was an Admiral Drayton, and I think he was also on a ship with Drayton's brother was a captain of the Pocahontas or whatever he was in. But that was then when he got through the Civil War, he became a cobbler.
In Fall River?
Fall River.
Huh.
Yeah. Now Grandma Thompson's family were Fall Riverites, and they ran a framing shop, and her name was Morgan, Edna Morgan. Her name was, I think it was Edna Louise Morgan. And so that's why the first son of Richard Thompson and Edna Morgan was named Morgan.
Right. Okay.
And then Morgan, then Norman, then Raymond. I think my mother got in the middle there somewhere. And then Eddie and Wendell. Wendell was the last one. I think the last two, your grandfather and Wendell were born after they moved up on Highland Avenue, because they had built a big. The third floor of Highland Avenue was for the kids and the maids, and it was it was built. It was 3 stories of livable space, but Grandma and Grandpa lived on the middle floor with one big beautiful guest room, a sewing room, reading room. You were there, I guess, yeah. A lovely bathroom, but the maids went up the stairs to us other bedrooms, and there was guest rooms upstairs. In fact, Edna used to live on the 3rd floor. But I got sick there. They put me on the 2nd floor to be near everything, so they wouldn't have to go up and down so much. There were no elevators, no elevators. And I had scarlet fever, and they quarantined the whole house, and so everyone got stuck. Yeah. Did you find something to drink?
We could give him some water.
Would you like some water?
No.
Are you sure? So how did you went to Worcester, not to Durfee High?
No, I left after 2 years in junior high. I went to Worcester.
Okay.
I didn't go to Durfee. You want coasters?
Yeah.
I just want to get in front.
Top drawer here, dear.
Okay.
Should be a
Look at
couple.
that, little birds.
So tell me how you were telling me about how with Mills your grandfather got involved in the store.
Well, when Mr. McCord died, there must have been some other influence. And these kids were basically, they were in the store. They went from cash boy to, worked their way up to the store, I gathered. Because they were able to issue stock, get some people, people to back them up. And they issued the stock. And the Mills, Mr. Mills, I think he had a brother, because I see his name placed. But so that they started, and when the company started, then they became officers in the company. because they were the ones that knew how to run it. And when that was a 5-story building at one time. Everything's different on the, the furniture was on the top and some, and it was a very specialized. Especially you could get anything you wanted there. If they didn't have it, the women would come in and say, "Can you get?" Well, sure. And that was the way it was built. And the clerks, most of the clerks, lived there forever. You know what I mean? It was a full-time job as long as they didn't make a mistake or something. And they couldn't make mistake with money because all the transactions were done with a tube. The amount, what was bought went up on a slip of paper, and the money, and all the way up to the 3rd floor. Now Norman was the treasurer. Morgan ran the store. He was, and Raymond was there also. There was 3 boys were there. And then there was a guy named Bob Hyde. The Hydes were a big liquor company in Fall River, wholesaler. And Bob was the son of Mr. Hyde, and Mr. Hyde was a stockholder. And there was a lot of people were stockholders. The names were familiar to me, but I forgot who they are. But, so it flourished, because by 1904, these houses here, Mr. Mills built one on the corner. Grandpa built this one, and he built a big home in Fall River.
And now we're talking about in Swansea. Down here at Mattapoisett.
He had one here for summer.
Yeah. So he had
and he had the big house on Fall River.
And then he built another summer house here in Swansea, right on the water.
Was
he the first?
They were called cottages.
Uh-huh.
I got a picture of it. I'll show you. And that they were strictly just all wood windows. They didn't have any heat. They didn't need any heat. They did have sewerage. They had, they had toilets when I was a kid. They might have had outhouses when they started. And you can see the garage next door with the 6 stalls. The Mills had the house on the corner, but he owned the house, the lot next door, and across two across from that. And the first one to the nearest the new house was the horse stalls, and they had horse and wagons, and eventually they had cars, but it was because the plate Frankie Holmes has here, his grandfather was a Duval, and Duval was big in Fall River. And his license plate was 4160. He also had one with 6900. And then Rachel Gardner's father, who I bought the house from Rachel, her family was 4161, which we have today. So those guys.
What do the numbers mean?
The numbers meant that you got there first. So the people with money had the low plates. And the low plates are now extremely valuable. And if you got down to like a 2 or a 3, they'd probably shoot you for $50,000, you know. But that was interesting.
When did R.S. Thompson buy Pequahunk, the farm?
Well, he bought that farm because I was a little boy. They'd already bought it. I think I've got a picture of the gang all sitting on the porch, and I don't think I was there. I might have been there in Mother's lap. So it had to be, I will say, mid-20s. And he bought that for himself to have his buddies come down, play cards, get drunk. You know, the place was farmed. They had a guy come cut the grass and all that crap. But that, you know, that house, and we spent, I won't say a couple of summers there, but before we got this house here, we were there for some time in the summer, because that's when I started doing all my hunting when I was about 8 or 9 years old. we bought this house here in 1936. So, and after that, of course, we didn't need a summer place, but
The house that Paul's in now.
the next door here, yeah.
So you bought that next to your grandfather's house.
Yeah, the grandfather's house was right there.
Yeah.
And there was another house right there. There was another house down there. There was another house over there. So through the 2 or 3 different storms, eliminated those. So that's why Grandpa had, there was I think it was, I forget when, but the house John bought behind me here,
Yeah.
with that big lot. The guy who bought that house back in the early 50s, I think, he owned all that space and all this. He didn't want all this. So he took 150 feet of this and gave it to everybody here, the width of their lots. So my father had the width of his lot, came all the way back to my back wall. There was nothing here then. Grandpa had his lot, and when at the 38 hurricane, he bought the lot next door because that was empty then. There was nobody there. He bought that lot. So Grandpa had 4 lots going that way, and Dad had 2 going this way. Grandpa's house went out in 54. So in 1960, we had 6 lots to work with. And Tony Waring, because he'd lived here with a storm, and we all had lived here through the weather. So that's why this house is where it is. We didn't want to put it down there because we had pictures of the water just screaming through here.
Yeah.
So this house, this land sloped this way. You can see this. You can see the angle.
Yeah.
So we basically chopped into this part and pushed up this part. That berm is fake. Yeah, I mean that was built there from the land that we took on this side. So then Tony designed the house with my wife, but she was very, very into this house. She knew exactly what she wanted because we lived on the 2nd floor of a house up there. Because when the plans came out with a 1 floor, everyone, oh my goodness, people would be looking in your windows. She says, I really don't care whether they look in my windows or not. I am not doing stairs. She had fallen down the stairs up there with a baby. And both didn't get hurt, but she was petrified that so everything is on 1 floor for us. And this design, but the walls, actually, it was funny because the money I had, I could only go just so far with what we had. And they started with way, way up. It was a custom house. And when the custom house, the builders hate it because it's all there in black and white. Mm-hmm. And there's an architect supervision. They hate that. I mean, Jesus. And Tony lived next door almost, So he stopped every day when this house was being built, after he got through work. But all these things, the height of the windows are for the dogs. The Scotties could look out. So anyway, if we'd had Great Danes, the Woodlanders would have been up here somewhere. And the walls, we were going to put a pad down because it was cheaper. And my father said, "You got to be crazy. You got to have something." So he basically chipped in and gave me the cellar hole. But Tony says, no windows. The walls are 10 inches rather than 8. So, and then this thing is all supported by the beam. There's a steel structure underneath. All this is supported by steel. Huh. This wall and this roof. And the house is built for the weather.
Yeah.
And in the cellar, right about here, there's a pipe goes down through the fields, and under the wall, the seawall, empties out. In case it ever filled up, it would empty itself. Huh. So it doesn't look like much, but it was.
So you were built.
It was all designed for this spot.
Yeah, you were in
Yeah.
vogue, like people thinking about climate change.
Yeah.
You were already aware of.
Well, you
climate
know, even now they got me in a flood zone because, which is ridiculous, but I have to pay it. But
Tell me more about your memories of Pequahunk. Did they call it Pequahunk?
No.
The farm? What did they call the farm?
well, we went to the farm. That was the farm. Pequahunk was a hunting camp further down on Quixon Pond. By it was built by a group of I won't say high level, but well-to-do Florida guys who were building at Westport Harbor. They were building the same kind of cottages there that some of the 4 boys built here. Now, Mr. Mills eventually, his family moved down to Westport Harbor, but they started here, and Mrs. Mills, Mrs. Prescott, ended up here. This was her house next door, and she ended up in the summer house because they kept that. But it was, I don't know, the Pequahunk was, it must have been styled after these guys had hunted someplace else, like Delaware or Maryland, where there was big flocks of geese. There was no geese here hardly. So they bought this property, bordered right on Quixon Pond, and they had a big, well, I was in it. They had a big frontage. It was all reeds built, but they had seats inside, but placed gun racks inside. But from the water, it just looked like it was marsh grass. They had a big tower, and the tower was for the guy who was the manager of the animals. They had trained geese and ducks, and they had leather thongs on 1 foot, and they were trained like a pigeon to fly out when they were released and come back to the.
To attract other birds.
They go out to incoming birds off the ocean. They'd send them out, and the guy in the tower would radio down to the boys playing poker and say, the birds are coming in. So they would just go down, pick up a gun and shoot, and then I guess the dogs would go out and.
And you're describing now another hunting shack further down the pond, not the farmhouse.
Nothing to do with the farm.
Okay.
And the farm stopped not far beyond your father's, I'll say, 3rd field or 4th field. It was, you know where that's all the stones that go to water? I think that was the last field, the last one over. The Charltons, who built the big home in Westport Harbor, and they also owned the Five and Dime operation that made them millions. They owned the big piece of land that Norman bought, which was a hill where the lookout was, and all the way over to this land, a Pequahunk. It stopped at that spot.
Now, Norman bought land next to his dad's farm.
Yeah.
Just to have his own place nearby.
Norman and Morgan's wife clashed. Clashed personality-wise. Norman turned around and said, "See you later." So he bought a huge piece of property from a guy named Quick. They owned behind the farm up to that road that goes over to Little Compton. So he had that whole ridge, plus all the fields down to the back of Grandpa's land, to the east of Grandpa's land. And that was about, Grandpa's land was like 90 acres. Norm's was about 150. So when Grandpa died, Dick Thompson, Morgan's oldest, was an engineer type person. he split up. He got those lots, so this and that. His lot was at the top of the ridge, near the lookout, and so also he kept a little bit of that. Teddy's lot was just beyond that. So they were there.
And did you continue to go up there as a kid?
Well, I bought one of those lots that Norman had. There was one lot. If you're driving into your father's, you drive in and you have to take the first big left turn, not the one that goes right away, across town. The first lot on the right I bought that lot because I had hunted that land for years, and it basically had the only tree on it. It had an old foundation, and there was a well on it, and it had a view of Quicksand and the ocean and all that stuff. I bought that lot because we were thinking about, we were here then, but I bought that. I thought, well, the taxes were better in Rhode Island or something. I got some crazy idea that I could move down there. But then when I got the deed, after I got paid the deed, I got the deed had what I call a hook in it. It's something like if a certain percentage of the owners of the property around this big piece of land in the middle voted to let somebody have a horse farm or a cow barn or some other crap, and it was all going to be right in my front door. So I turned around and I said, look, you just should have showed me this deed first. No way am I going to spend. I had already had a guy come in and tell me it's going to cost me $10,000 to fix the stone wall. And I wasn't going to get down there and put $250,000 into a house. And then all of a sudden in 10 years, some guy said, well, I'm going to race racing horses, and I'm going to have all the smell from a barn, and he's going to have the money, because he's going to live somewhere else. So I said, I'll see you later. So we came back here with whatever I put into that, and I think we put the deck on then, and maybe some other additions. And really, I'm so glad I did it, because that's a long haul. If I was still working all the time, and just get the office in Fall River was 25, 30 minutes. And there wasn't, 88 was not there. You had to do this all the way up. And so, but a lot of our friends did go down there. And I'm glad we stayed here, because people come here who've never been in this area. Geez, this is fantastic. And I've sit here and we got the bird baths. I have to fill them every day. They come in, they have a bath, they eat, drink. The other morning, the black furniture condensation, overnight condensation, had a little family of 3 little families of these little yellow birds. They were getting their morning drink from the little puddles of water on them. And I was there standing there at the sink, and I was like, God, the time I got my camera, they were gone. They only go like a beep, beep, like that. I don't know how much water they take, but that's all they need. And the big black guns, they come in and have a drink. Then they decide to have a bath, and they preen themselves. And
Yeah, I saw it. One of
and
them.
this morning I was at the sink and looking out, and there's 2 squirrels. And the one squirrel ran right on top of the hedge. I don't know how the hell he could. He was getting chased by Mr. Wonderful, I think. So she goes right on top of that hedge. I said, holy Christ! And again, I'm sitting there, putting dishes away, and all. So there's something going on. This thing is a moving picture constantly.
Yeah, that's great. I want to go back to. When you're living in Fall River, you've gone to Worcester. What's the first thing that you collected, and how did you get the idea?
I was collecting guns then.
How did you start collecting guns? Where did you get the idea that you should start collecting things?
Well, we had 2 guns in our house. One was a long government rifle from the 1880s. I never found out why it got there. And the other one was a big Civil War revolver, which we basically played with. You know, they were there. And I thought this is fascinating. I started collecting the revolvers. And
how'd you do that? Where'd you get
well,
the
I
money?
mean, I said to my father, can I have the gun? Oh, what the hell? He didn't know whose it was either. So I had that revolver. I started with that. And I think the first one I bought, I think it was the story I told you about finding the gun at the antique shop and I bought on time. The guy wanted $1 for the gun. So I said, look, I don't have $1.
Sit here. You've listed one price.
Okay.
So yeah, tell us again.
So I'd walk downtown and he was probably, maybe a mile and a half from the house. So I'd walk down if I had a nickel or a dime and put it against the $1. Finally got the $1. Now I used the revolver. If I shot a woodchuck and wounded it, I'd just go put it in his ear. And I had little shorts. He'd go, beep, and put him out of his misery. It was my boom, boom. But I carried it hunting. I didn't carry it anywhere. And that gun turned out to be worth a fortune. And after I sold it, I found that out. It was the first gun that Smith & Wesson made that took a cartridge. And but I had that, and I started with that. And at one point, my Uncle Norman made me a gun case, big gun case, probably about as high as that mantelpiece, 2 big glass front doors, all the pegs in the back. I had probably had maybe 20, 22 Civil War revolvers. And for some reason or other, I started to get fascinated with these carbines. And then a revolver was worth maybe 2 or 3 carbines. And we're talking, I bought a revolver from a guy in Fall River, Civil War.
And were you buying from? Was he the original owner, or was he a?
Well, I bought from people. I'd get to know people who were either gun clubs or something. And this guy he said, well, I got a revolver. I went down to his house, an old guy. He comes out with this, not a rare gun, but a brand new. Well, a guy named Bannerman in New York. In fact, Bannerman Island is still in the Hudson River. Bannerman, that was his storehouse. Bannerman had a shop down in Lower Broadway, which I used to stop at, by the way. I had an account on Canal Street, so Lower Broadway was right by it. So he bought, in the very beginning, Civil War extra from the government, and a lot of the stuff never got issued. It was still, quote, in the grease. So this guy must have had that. He never used it. And for $15, I bought a brand new gun. Today, that brand new gun on the market would probably be worth $6,000 or $7,000. And that's why. So sometime when I sold all my guns in 1960, I get $22,000 for what I had. But if I had the money, if I hadn't had to use that, I would have had a lot of money in the guns. But I also knew that I had to, eventually with the kids coming along, tuitions and all that stuff that goes with the happy married life, and I couldn't have kept doing what I've been doing. But I got, when I got to Worcester Academy, because I'm still, 13 years old, I was buying guns then.
Huh.
There was Worcester Academy's on a hill, and you walk downtown to Worcester. I went right by a little old antique shop, junk shop, and I got a picture of my hanging out like my dorm window, hanging onto a shop's carbine I'd just bought. so, so guns was something that nobody cared about.
Yeah. And a 13-year-old come off downtown and buy one.
Well, you would just, it was no problem. And as eventually, I joined National, and I was asked to join, a friend of mine, and with that, I got to know the guys that were writing the books, the guys who had the super collections, the guys who knew what was going on. So then I started trading the revolvers, but most people liked the revolvers. Then I traded them for the carbines. But if I had, a good revolver was worth maybe 3 or 4 carbines. When I bought a lot of stuff that I didn't, wasn't quite what I wanted, and I traded that off. And I had, I had all the cowboy guns, and I had, a lot of stuff in it. But it was, I had, over here, I had the wooden walls. And my bedroom had all hooks all over. But every time we moved, I packed it all up, and the moving van would come and take it over across the river, and we'd bring it back and put it up in the summer. I had.
My dad talks about sleeping in Louise's house with the walls covered with carbines.
Yeah.
And what a fantasy that was. Do you remember the first time that you met my dad? He must have come over from LA, right?
Well, he was in Andover for a while. He'd come down for, as a kid, he'd come down for, he didn't go back to LA for holidays. He came to spend it with Graham and Graham. And he was there a lot, and I think we probably maybe even hunted a little bit together. And one of my trips out, I might have been, well, I know he was in the, they were living, it was near the water somewhere. Because your father and I went hunting on somebody's hill who didn't like us hunting. All of a sudden, says the guy, "Hey!" He said, "Well, I was hoping he wouldn't be. I was hoping he wouldn't be around." I don't know what we were hunting for. Maybe for birds.
Not over at People Hunk. This is somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh no! This is on California's slopes.
Oh! You went out west.
Oh yeah. Well, when I used to drive out.
Huh.
I had, I got a picture of me with the first car I had that I went with to the West Coast. I had a big convertible. Your Aunt Nancy loved it because she was too young to drive, but she wasn't too young to sit in it, and, drive through here. I know so and so. Yeah. She was really a character. She was a nice lady. Good. I had a lot of fun with her. Yeah, but no, the car was really a beautiful car. Yeah, in those days I was getting a car every year because I put on so much mileage. But that was my first trip I took. I had trying to connect all my dealers together. I like to see them at least once a year personally rather than phones and letters. Because we didn't have all this email crap. This was real people, real problems. There was no tweet today, no tweet, no, forget that tweet, I want to tweet. Okay.
These are your gun dealers that you were visiting across the country?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, going to check in on them.
Well, we had, by the time I did that trip, which was like 1952 or 3, I'd been working for 4 or 5 years, and I had built up, through connections and through the business, quite a few different people representing us, or the reps would go to a bigger accounts and they get a commission. But the distributors would come into them and they'd sell to the individual shops that were using it.
Now, are you talking about Cottrell paper? Now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. So these are your customers across the country.
Yeah.
For Cottrell
Well,
paper.
no, not so much my customers as the people who were selling to our customers.
Okay. Okay.
So I always ended up in L.A. So I come up. The first trip I took on the southern route through Yuma and came across to San Diego, and then up, and then to San Francisco, and then back from San Francisco back on the northern route, because I'd start late spring. I could get in the south without any trouble. Coming back, it was still, the Donner Pass still looked like the Donner Pass. The snow was as high as that window over the road, you know. They had this cut, you know. But it was funny because I had this beautiful, this convertible. So I start out, I forget where I was. Oh, it was Reno or something. I was going to go over. And I get to this place in the road, and I'm looking up at the snow. Well, as the snow melted, it did this. It looked like it was doing this. So I stopped and put the top up. And I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, well, you're going to be insane. If that thing fell, you'd be squashed in the transmission. It was all the boom, what the hell's going on?
That's amazing. I just want to, because I have not heard anything really about this, but can you remember what it was like visiting my dad and Nancy? And this is Eddie, right? And Woofie. What did you call?
Woofie?
What did you call Eddie's wife? My dad's mom.
Well, I call her Elizabeth, but
Elizabeth, yeah.
They call her Woofie.
Yeah, but do you remember what that house was like, and what was that family?
Well, it was a lovely home. Yeah, but it was near enough to a swim community because the kids loved it. And I won't say they could almost walk to the beach, but I forget the name. That was before they moved to that gated community in L.A.
Which might have been Westwood or Brentwood.
Well, I don't know, but when I visited them a year or two later, I did the trip 3 or 4 times, so at a later date, they were like downtown in a gated community, because when I got there, they told me how to get there, and of course they stopped me, and I said, I'm going to visit Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Okay. And he takes my number down. And he said, follow me. I follow. There it is. So I went that night. I forget where I was. I'd run into somebody I knew when I was going to have dinner with them. So I came back about 10 o'clock. Cars at the gate. Follow me. Right there. No baloney, everybody knew exactly who was coming through the gate.
Huh.
Then of course, when they went down to Southern California, I stopped there a couple of times, and that was lovely. The golf course is right there.
Yeah, Lake San Marcos.
And that was I got there, I knew where it was, so I got there no problem. I was sitting there, having a drink, looking at the course. What's so different? What's so different about this place? I'm looking around. Eddie said, we don't have any wires. All the wires are underground. There's no telephone poles. And it was, Jesus, how beautiful. And the distance, in the property, on the hill was this great big goddamn antenna. All the TVs are hooked up. I said, this was the beginning of something great, because we're up to our ass in telephone poles. Every storm, the trees are taking down poles, and and it's unbelievable. And whoever developed that, and that was lovely. The people were great, because most of them were all golfers, and he could walk off the patio and start a round of golf.
Yeah, he had his own golf cart.
Yeah.
They went right around to.
Oh, Margot's got one now. I bought it for her so she could get down to the garden and water it. Christopher's garden, by the way.
Yeah.
I got to show you his tent later.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, let me just go
Yep.
back to.
We're going
How did you
backwards.
meet Margot?
I met her right here in Swansea. She was a summer student at Rhode Island School of Design with the architect's sister, Tony Waring's sister, Susan. And the 4th of July, this very day, they were having a cookout for Susan's gang from RISD. So Tony called me, he says, I got 3 or 4 women here, I'm up to my ass in women. Could you help me? Come over and help me out. So 2 or 3 of us went over and, tried to make it easy for him. So I ended up, for some unknown, I know it was an unknown reason, but one of those things that happened. And there was this girl there that, I just said, hello, how are you? And it was also, pooh, it was so, we just talking and said, well, I'll take you out to dinner. I said, oh, yeah. So a couple of days later, I took her out to dinner. And about 2 or 3 dinner dates, I said, listen, I got this feeling you and I said, when would you like to get married? I didn't say, there was none of that on the niche shit. It was, when do you want to get married? And she said, well, I got to call my family. She was only 19 years old, and she's still in school. So she called the family. Then I had to go to Minneapolis and get approved. And they took me out to dinner to one of their friends to watch how I ate and how, all this, because he was a doctor, and all his friends were at that level. Nice people, but I went through all that. So we were married at Thanksgiving. So we met in July, and we were married Thanksgiving.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And then this year's is 65 years.
Huh.
Yeah. Jesus, how time flies. Oh, we've been here since 1960. This house.
Yeah.
And, I look around and for what we've had as far as kids and people, and it's still in pretty good shape. I mean, you could spend some money cleaning it up a little here and there, but, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't change a thing. But someone would come in and say, oh, that's the crazy looking chair. Well, I know, but it's 65 years old, so,
And it's the right height.
just right there so the dogs could look out of the top of the window.
Well, let me jump ahead now to your next collection. After you sold the carbines, did it happen after you sold the carbines, or were you already starting to look at your next?
Well, I sold the carbines was all I had when we sold the guns for this. But in between, I sold a lot of oddball stuff. I ended up selling all the revolvers, and I had 182 carbines, and that was a lot. And what happens is the real era that the carbines were very, very popular, because they had, the development was going from what we call a paper shell, paper cartridge, where you had a piece of paper with a ball at the end of it, to the copper brass shell. And the Civil War this was all development, and everybody and his brother was putting in samples for the government to get, well, there was all kinds of guns. And some of them, like the guy only made 6 of them or something like that, Mm-hmm. And I had picked up a couple of those, and I had a lot of rare stuff. I said not of some of the ordinary stuff. I still see some of that. I missed one, maybe 10 years ago. I should have bought it, but my guns were gone. And I promised, I have a funny way of doing things. If I decide to give up something, I give it up. When I gave up biting my nails so I could get in the service, I never bit them again. I gave up smoking. I was sitting in that den, the doctor was over looking at one of the kids. He heard me coughing in there. He said, you keep that up and you won't have to worry too long. I never touched another cigarette 50 years ago.
Wow.
So when I sold the guns, I said to the guy, look, you're going to come, you're going to take them all. Take them all. I don't want one favorite left. They're gone. So they came with a big truck and we wrapped them all up. Gave me the money and off they went. And I never bought another gun for that. I had guns. I hunted. I had hunting guns. But if you don't, I hate to say it, but if you don't make a commitment to yourself it can't happen. So you have to be, well, probably nuts, but it's that room was going to be a gun room, and that room would have been jammed to top, and there would have been no windows in it, and that door you wouldn't have seen because it was going to be a push-button door like I've got downstairs. So there's nobody could get curious, and so in a way I'm glad in a way, but Margot, we were spending money on China too. At the end of the thing, I had said, well, we'll shop. We could go to antique shops or go to a show. You need something to do too. So, and we were doing American Eagles on China. And the English were making, they started right after the War of 1812 and started putting, pictures of Jefferson and the admirals that beat them in 1812. In all that period, there was all kinds of Liverpool jugs and stuff. And we had a big collection of those. Again, bought for almost nothing compared to, but we bought, we went to England a couple of times. I bought, there was a shop in England that specialized in Liverpool jugs and stuff. And the guy would send me stuff in. He'd write me and say, he told, send me a picture. He says, I got this for such and such. And he'd ship me from England.
Is a Liverpool jug a style of jug, or is it literally?
Well, it was a nickname, but a lot of the stuff was made in Liverpool, I think, originally. We went to a China place, Staffordshire. We had given something to one of the museums there. When I was selling, when we started traveling a lot, and we this whole bookcase, and was a whole bookcase there full of china. I had, I said, some kid gets in here and looking for some shitty piece of electronics. He just have to get mad and break every goddamn thing in it. And it was real history, and I basically am a historian and don't know it, but I got we put it all on an auction, and we were sorry we did, but but I kept one piece in a cup and saucer that was, I had bought a whole set from a guy, but there was one piece with the name of the people that made it and with the eagle on it. And I wrote to the company in England that made it, and I said, are you interested in something like this? And these pictures, and they, an old manufacturer, and he wrote me back. He said, we have no record of making this, but our name, we know we made it. He said, this must have been made for an ambassador to England with the American eagle on it. And it was beautiful. So I said, well, okay, and this was 1976, centennial. So I packed it up, sent it over to him, and said, with the regards of the Cottrell family. So the next time we went to England, I wrote him, I said, we're going to be in the neighborhood. He said, oh yeah. And a lot of the factories are all in this one area. So we got in there, and the guy takes us through. And one of the cases, here's the cup and saucer, compliments to the Cottrell family. I said, here I was sitting there with little stuff like that is always fascinates me.
Yeah.
But it can happen, and it does happen.
So you guys were collecting china, and then.
And we were doing both.
And mourning ribbons? When did?
Well, that came later.
Okay. What came after china?
Well, I think maybe the Chinas went. The guns were already gone. I think I got into the mourning ribbons. Probably the same time. It probably started at the same time that China, because the mourning ribbons were in that era also of the early 1800s.
Tell me what the mourning ribbons were.
Well, the public bought them. they pinned, it would been, say, goodbye George Washington, and they had, well, I must have had 30 or 40 Lincoln, because Lincoln was, no matter where you go or what you do, Lincoln is the middle of the whole thing. Washington's great in one corner. But when you get to Lincoln, Lincoln did something to the country that nobody else has done. And I don't mean he didn't tweet it to death. He had people really thinking American. Because when they give they put him on a train, had a whole train, and the streets, the countryside was lined with people, and they would have gone out and bought a ribbon that said, and they pinned on their jackets. And
it was a silk.
It was silk ribbons mostly. It's so wide and so long.
And embroidered with.
Well, they had pictures sometimes and names and stuff, and I had a hell of a collection. In fact, I had some. I started putting them in frames because I like to see them. And when I went to sell them, again, what happens is I start on something that's not popular, and all of a sudden I run out of place that all of a sudden people get popular. And all of a sudden the ribbons went from $5 to $25 to $50 to $150. And I got to the point where I couldn't find anything halfway decent. So I had maybe 300 or 400 ribbons, all different people, mostly mourning ribbons, but once in a while there'll be a campaign ribbon. So I had them all framed, and I went to sell them. Guy said, "I'll give you $40,000 for them." So I packed them up. Well, I had to take them out of the frames. But when one of the framers that I used tape on the back of the ribbons to put them to make them in the. So the guy called me. He said, I hate to tell you this, but whoever put the tape on there, on some of them, is gonna. He says, I'll give you $30,000. It cost me $10,000 for that guy to be a shitty framer. Yeah, and it was. So that was the end of the ribbons. But I was in harpoons too, so the harpoons I handled myself. I had the walls downstairs full of harpoons.
And it was harpoons.
Whaling harpoons.
Your great grandfather. I mean, that you were connected.
Yeah, that's
so what was your first? How did you first start?
Well, I forget how I got going into the. I don't know why, but I started thinking, oh, this is good. So I started buying harpoons. And again, I don't think people were really interested in harpoons until I started buying them. It wasn't me. Crawford's, the Smiths, Crawford and Pye, Margot and I used to go to Boston maybe once a month for lunch at the Ritz and shop some antiques, maybe Brooks Brothers, that kind of good little trip. Small, and we got in this shop, and the guy had maybe 6 or 7 harpoons, all different heads. They had different. There again, the harpoon was like the carbines. The inventors were trying to find out what stuck the best and what perforated the poor bugger or whatever, So I bought him. I bought all he had for like $20, $30 a piece. So I went back a couple of months later. We were up there in the same shop, and he had some more harpoons. And he looked at me. He said, "I know you." Yeah, you bought all my. Yes, I did. Well, that one is now $100 and not $25. So I think I bought one more. So Crawford was buying stuff. And he said, we were the same guy. So we go in there and Crawford bought something, and he said, and what's your name? Mr. Cash. he had Crawford. When Crawford had a lumber yard, and every time we went on a trip, we'd pick him up and he'd reach in the till and take what he wanted. So he always had plenty of cash, Mr. Cash. And this guy, the dealer, was a nice old German, Jewish boy, who everything he squeezed was, had to be more squeezed to him than to you. So I never could buy another thing from him, but the stuff was around. I went to the Whaley Museum with what I had, not to show, to look and see, because I had maybe, at that point, maybe 12 or 15 different heads and different makers. They're also marked by different ships. They put the name on the harpoon, because a lot of times 2 or 3 different ships would get the same, go after the same animal. So that they got, I get 2 harpoons and you only get 1. I'll take 2/3 of it. You take, I don't know how it worked, but they did have the names on a lot of them, and because that made the thing bigger. And so I went over there and I said, you've got a great collection. Well, why aren't you putting it in book form so the rest of us can find out what the hell we've got? Well, they did, because they had, they had barrels of this stuff. They still have it. So after I sold the harpoons, of course, the goddamn book comes out. So, the thoughts I had for them, they did. But then I sold the harpoons.
You sold the harpoons to the Whaling Museum?
No.
To someone
There was a
else?
dealer on Nantucket, a big marine dealer. And so I had been at a show, and I'm thinking about, I said, I got some harpoons. Oh, he said, bring them over. So it was funny, because I found out I had to take the ferry. I had to get the car, because I didn't, So I went down, got on the ferry, station wagon full of harpoons. My wife's station wagon. That's what they called them then. And so I get over, and I woke up in the morning. This bay was screaming, white caps, So I called Hyannis, wherever the boat came from, the Woods Hole. I said, you running the ferry to, oh, sure. I said, oh, sure, okay. So I said, I'll be down, So I get on the ferry, and it's funny, the Nantucket's, I don't know, maybe an hour's ride or half, or 45. The boat came out of Woods Hole, and the wind is, blowing like hell, but he kind of took a tip like that. Didn't do and he never, that's it. He just sat on it, and the wind just kept him at the same angle. We came over without a ripple. I mean, the boat didn't do this, When I get there, the guy bought everything but a couple. I got $10,000, and I think Ben was at Worcester then. Helped me on that one. I kept one harpoon, but I sold it later. But it was an interesting era, and I was always at a point where I had bought stuff reasonably enough so I could sell it and still make a profit, even though the other guy was making a bigger profit. That didn't particularly bother me. I had my fun, I still buy stuff today that, I have no right to buy, but it's something that keeps me going. Now I'm buying some stuff for John.
Oh, yeah.
John's doing these, I've been doing what they call covers, some philatelic covers, and he's doing the World War II covers that have got things on them, like, shoot Hitler and on the envelope.
Like propaganda.
Yeah, they're all rah 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 America.
Let me just go back to, tell me again how you got involved in the starting of the Fall River Marine Museum.
Well, we got started. Schoolmate of mine, Fall River, the school, the grammar school, and that level was he and another schoolmate had both gone from junior high to Andover to the academy, Naval Academy. They both, and so Jack came. They came out. Oh, probably right after World War II, and they stayed in the Navy. They had to stay like 6 years for academy, and he was involved. Jack was involved in. They wanted to get the battleship Massachusetts. Well, I guess they wanted to get it to Boston, and Boston didn't want it or something. I don't know. So, anyways, they had a thing here. So the battleship came, and they hooked it all up.
And this is Jack Brayton?
Jack Brayton.
Jack Brayton, and did you say his brother?
No,
Another guy?
Another friend of mine.
Okay.
Tom Hudner. The second guy was Tom Hudner.
Okay.
The one I went to Washington to see buried. Yeah.
Huh,
But
okay.
anyway, so Jack comes to me. Jack, because I think it was the academy, they always told people by their last name. So I'm in the office, and Jack walks in. He says, "Cottrell?" Yeah, Jack. What's up? He said, "You know, we're going to start a museum." I said, "Well, what do you want me for?" He said, "Well, you know people with stuff." I said, "Well, yes, but..." So it turns out he had, and with a couple other guys, after the battleship was there a couple of years, the curiosity starts to fade. He said, "We need something else here in the cove to keep the cove alive." I know, okay, we'll try it. So there was all volunteer. We had a couple of good lawyers. We had a couple of this, a couple of that. So he said, "No, it's up to you to get some stuff." I said, it just so happened that the biggest Fall River Line collection was in Newport with my friend who lives across the street here, cousin. So I had a handshake of deal, went down there and talked him out of his collection. And he was an old bachelor. I had to forget what he did. I think the family at one time were running the laundry for the Fall River Line. They did all the sheets and blankets as the boat stopped in Newport, and they stopped about 2 houses from where this guy lived. So he also had a lot of pictures, and when they were breaking up the boats, he'd get down the dock and grab stuff, and we had a great collection. Beautiful old home, full. He played the organ for the church. That was, but he had an organ in his house. So we got that, and I said, he said, "Well, I'm going to sell you." It was some very small price. These guys had, most of his stuff he just picked up off the street, So we paid him something like $5,000 a year for, I don't know, maybe 4 years. He was very happy with it. So we get it, and we took everything right out of it. Went down, took everything out of his house, and he had paintings. He had pieces of the boats, and he had a lot of information. It was a core of the music. And then Margot and a young minister, we get the stuff in. We got the building. We got a building. They put it all in order. In the 1840s, 50s, 60s, around, and they did all that for the Fall River Line, because basically that's what it was supposed to be. Well, because then we had to take in other stuff, and some people would bring in a sailboat model. So we take it, but it was in the attic. It wasn't a sailboat museum. I think it is now. It's just it's a maritime museum now. But that was, that's probably 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was a charter member. Jack Brayton was the first president, and he had a problem with, he ground some people the wrong way. Well, he was two things. He was an Annapolis graduate, and the Brayton family were bankers, and so he had a level problem. So they said, well, why don't you take over, Tom, and you have a different level problem. Well, we can probably live longer with your level. So Jack was and then I think Margot got involved, and then she got involved in the state park, which is in the part of the cove. She was the first woman who ran a state park, and that lasted a while. So we've been involved civically over there. Yeah. And in the middle of it, I was starting to do less traveling. At that point, I'd been traveling a lot, and then it started to wear. When things got so they were working, we didn't have to keep reminding people how to make it work. Once you found out, here's how we do it. What we're doing is we're selling a product that we think is the best you can get. If you have a problem, let us know immediately, because that's when I would go to the problem and find out what was wrong. And sometimes we find out it was somebody else's product, because there was 3 or 4 of us making it. But that was, it always looked good when that was. But if there was a real problem with our stuff, it didn't meet the spec, we just take it back and give them some more. We had no problem with that. It was it worked out for us. We ended up to being the only one left after it all started. People went out into different things, but we're still making specialized paper.
Right, through Cottrell, yeah.
Yeah, and it's altogether different now. That I was up there in May at a meeting, and the things they've done is unbelievable. They've got products that are no longer used for insulation. That for some other reason they found other things other places, and they had a great year last year, and they still send me money.
That's great. That's good. What do you think is the going back to the Marine Museum, the Fall River? What's the most important thing they have, or the most important collection or object they have?
Well, I don't know if there's any one thing. They originally had a lot of big models.
We're back.
Well, not too long after we started, the Siemens Church Institute in New York, which was a famous institute downtown, were going to build a new one, and they had all these models from the old one. In other words, people would give them models of their ship, or the this and that. So they needed a place to put them. So we went up there and looked at them and said, yeah, we'd love to have a few of these. So I personally made an agreement with them. The Siemens Church was run by the Episcopal Church. So the guy, he was a white-collar guy. I don't think he was a bishop, but he was a high level, he was a curator. And the deal was, he said, you're just starting, but if you're still in business in 5 years, we'll leave them there. I said, well, that's fair enough. We don't know how long we're going to last either. But at sometime after that, when we had passed our grade, they decided there was a big market for some of these models. So they came down and said, well, we take this and back. I said, hey, what about the deal we made with this guy? Oh, well, we don't, nothing on black and white. I said, listen, I'm not a black and white guy. I make a deal. I shake your hand. Forget the black and white. I shook my hand with a guy with a fucking white collar who gave me his word. And you aren't good. I was so goddamn mad. I said, why don't you just take your model and get out? You know, and I won't say I've never been to church since. I never went before either. But it certainly didn't help me there. I've never had anybody do that to me. It's not the way I live. I don't think any of us who really live a decent life. If you shake a guy's hand, to me it was just like, you know, I had all kinds of business deals. If I shook his hand and said, this is what we're going to do for you, we did it. It was not oh, well, it's too much, it's too little. That's crap. You make a commitment, you do it. Like getting married. You make a commitment. So many people say, well, I didn't like, she didn't make it, you know, my brother-in-law. Well, his wife said, oh, you're not making me happy anymore. Well, Jesus Christ, do you think every day is going to be a happy day in your life? You know, how many times you look at your wife and you say, God damn it, why did you do that? But you don't go crazy and jump in a divorce wagon and say, I'm leaving. Where the hell are you going to go when you leave? You know, some other horror scene, who knows? I don't know. I mean, I've been happy as a clam, but you know, some people just can't seem to understand it's a job. Yeah. It is a commitment, a basic commitment, a big one. You know, it's not a little tiny one. And you get killed little people walking along that you want them to be committed to the right way. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not, you know, it's interesting. Life is extremely interesting. And I've been lucky. My life has been very interesting, you know, and I've enjoyed it.
You've got your kids still coming through the house, and you've got Cottrell Palooza in the summer, and
well, you know, I had one of the things I did get into was the steamship. I had these little the invoice things for ships. Everything going on a boat, got you know, 1 barrel of whiskey. I collected the steamboats, and I had another stuff with deep water or saltwater boats, steamers. They were the steamboats were the river boats. The steamships were for saltwater. So when I had a big collection of steamboat, and there's a book out with like a little bio of maybe 4,500 steamboats the guy put together in the U.S. It's that thick. It's the Bible of all the steamboats. He was a steamboat captain. And I had over 2,000 different boats in black and white, not pictures, but invoices and stuff. So I decided, well, there again, I'm running out of sources. I was getting stuff. Steamboating was funny, and I don't understand, but I could get stuff from the Midwest, like Utah or Wyoming. Well, it had to go in the caravans of the pioneers, that they take it with them. Paper, what the hell would they do with paper? You know, the poor goddamn horses were dying anyway. You know, what you'd think they'd throw the paper out, what, you know, but no, so, and I was getting in big lots. I went out to one big auction. I was doing business with a guy in Ohio, was a #1 collector of this stuff. And he and I were swapping back. I had some real early stuff that he needed. I had some duplicates. And we were doing a nice friendly thing. And he died. And I never met him. I never eye to eye. We talked, we wrote. But his stuff came up at auction in Ohio. So I called them, found out when it was. And so Margot and I got in the car and drove to Ohio. But I called the guy up. It was Garth was the auctioneer. the Midwestern high-level auctioneer. I said, I'm coming on. I'm sure I'm going to buy something. What kind of references do you need? You want me to bring a bank check or a bank? He said, Mr. Cottrell, he's bringing me a checkbook. I don't care what. I never met him. I didn't, Jesus Christ, okay. So we get there, and we went, they had a preview the day before. I went through a lot of the stuff, figured out what lot they had allotted. And I bought about $5,000 worth of paper. I get to the checkout, yes, and I said, they told me just write the check, and I wrote a check for whatever it was. And we stopped on the way back to the hotel. I went to a Chinese restaurant. It was funny. I can remember that we had I forget, we had lemon chicken or something I liked, and they had pea pods. I said, I have a side order of pea pods too. That's a nice vegetable, The guy brought a platter of pea pods. I ate the whole goddamn thing, but I had pea pods coming up my ear. But I had all this paper and I had the pea pods to go with it. And we laughed all the way home. It was so we had fun.
That's great.
But when I decided to get rid of mine, I didn't want to die and go to auction. I called another guy in Ohio I had met. I said, I'm looking for a museum. He said, well, there's some of the small ones here and there. He gave me a list of them. So we got in the car again. And we went and we stopped. We did all along the Ohio River and some of the small rivers. Went all the way into Iowa and some of that stuff. Couldn't really find anything. So we came back to this guy in Marietta, Ohio. He was very involved in the steamboat ship. So he said, Cincinnati has what they call an inland river library. I said, okay, I'll get a hold of them. So I called them. In fact, I think we went, I don't know, no, I think I went to Cincinnati myself on business, so I went to the library. He talked to them, told them what I had. So the guy said, I had recently bought this Bert Fenn auction stuff. Oh, he said Bert Fenn was a #1 collector. I said, well, he didn't want all his, but I got a good chunk of it. He said, well, we'd love that because I had everything listed. I had bought that big book that had all the bios in it. I bought another one, an older issue, but I would cut out the bio of the boat and then put it with. So they said, yeah, we'd love to have that. So Margo and I, again, went out and we got to the museum and they were absolutely delighted. And I said, I got to have some kind of an appraisal number because I want to take a deduction. So they gave me a $60,000 appraisal, which I took. Because I got $30,000 from the Marine Museum, but that was different. So on the paper alone, there was $90,000 off my taxes. So there's a lot of fun to it, in a way, But I don't say you got to have the right stuff, but it was so happened, everything I've had has been in demand by somebody else.
Yeah.
Which is, I hope, the stuff I've put aside, oddball stuff, the kids could find the right avenue for it to go. Who knows? When my fun days are over, I don't care what they do with it. There's enough stuff to keep them busy for a couple of years, because it's taken me 10 or 15 to put it all together.
That's right. That's right.
Boxes and crates and crates.
Why do you think it's important that Fall River has a marine museum?
Well, it was the hub of the cotton industry. And Fall River was the biggest cotton manufacturer in the country, in the world, at one time. I think, at least the country. They had, I think it's about 125 big mills over there that made something but different types of, cotton cloth, cotton this,
Here, hold on 1 second while we. Is that it? Yep, 15 minutes. Yeah.
That's all. Is this that's quarter after something?
Yeah.
That was.
So Fall River was a big cotton.
Well, they had, the Fall River line,
Yeah.
which ran every day, and they had birds jumping in the hedge for something. They have so much fun. I think they make out in the hedge. I won't cut. I was going to cut the hedge a little bit. They had not only the passenger boats, which took a lot of cotton back and forth. They took cotton goods back and forth. A lot of it was factored from New York. They all, like a big mill here, would have a factor in New York who did the thing. And then when the people who were buying cotton, they had somebody who was for the cotton business. These are all family oriented. One of the cousins or one of the brothers. So there'd be a guy in Nashville keeping an eye on the cotton business, putting that in the right boat to get back to Fall River. All that, and that was big. The Fall River made a bunch of millionaires when the million was a million. I mean, a real million. When I got the paper, got all the papers from the Jiffy Mill, which was a big old mill. I went through 75,000 pieces of paper. And they were all initialed by a guy named David Brayton, D-A-B, on every slip, in or out. And there was one they put, the secretaries put, like every month would be a little, they'd fold them up, tie them with a little string. They didn't have elastic, it was a little string. And I forget what it was, like 1880, I'd open them up, and they're mostly all the same stuff. The guy that selling leather belts for the machinery, the hay for the horses, but there was a lot of cotton from the southern people with the pictures of the colored people picking cotton. Some stuff had the boats, and that all. I put one of everything I gave to the Fall River Historical Society. And but the Fall River itself was a big industry, like the mills. There's all kinds of people that feed off it. The guy that sells the oil for the crankcases and because the people themselves and the way they have to live, you have to build whole houses for them. Home, because they pay you back, and a lot of those tenements, that's what they were built by the mills, and then the mill, they'd have a bell in the mill that would ring at 6 o'clock, go to get to work, and everyone would pour out of these things, but the 2 or 3 of my friends were their fathers were in different businesses, because there was a lot of cotton brokers. But then there was guys that was selling belting. There was guys that were selling all kinds of stuff to the mills. And the mills, he kept, using it. And the mills would, another mill would pop up. But a lot of times it was a similar people who owned the other one, the next one. And then the same with the banks. The directors of one be maybe also splintered around other banks. So everything that happened within I'll say a 200 brain glob. People who knew and what to do and how to make the money. Or maybe not 200, maybe 2,000, but I mean, it was an inner circle of wealth.
And McClure's was in that. Right?
Yeah.
The store was a central part of the way Fall River worked.
The people who built over here were all people from downtown McCoy, downtown. The paper shop, this, that, and this stuff. Big names. Streets are named after them. You know, the whole. And there must be a Thompson Street somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Actually, your grandfather was not a publicity man. He was a good old solid. He'd laugh with the best of them, drink with the best of them. He wasn't a big drinker, but he never sat down with my father without having a drink. You know, come on over. They played a lot of cribbage together. That's how I learned watching them play cribbage as a little boy. And see, and I said, "What?" I say, well, "Grandpa, why'd you do that?" "Oh, because." "Oh, okay." People ask me sometimes, "Why don't you?" "Well, I have my own reasons." You know, I'm not going to tell you all my secrets. You know, it's not.
Tell me about the Crickershan Club.
Well, that was started by the guys who were running the city.
Sorry, I was.
It was a private club.
Tell me what it is.
Crickershan was a private club. Male only. They had, good dining. They had rooms. The third floor had rooms for people, the visiting salesmen that would come up from New York. They had a night clerk. It was a regular hotel club, and very, very, very busy for years. Most of the bank presidents and people, the high rankers, were members. They probably had, 200 or 300 members. And but it was like, if you wanted to go to New Year's Eve party, you better get your name in September, because they could only take care of 200 people or something like that.
When did it start?
It started in I think early 1900s.
As the gentry really expanded in Fall River, as their
they had one building, and then they bought the one next door and joined them, and that's what it is now. But what happens is that the banks were starting to be bought out by bigger banks. The personal touch started to be lost. At one point, I was a president for a few years. I was a president of everything for a few years. One of my specialties was being a president, but I don't. There was no more money in it, I could go anywhere in the city and talk to someone who could give me an answer, a real answer, not this. "Well, we'll get back to you." Don't get back to me, because I'm not going to turn my back on you. I don't like that stuff. That's what's happening today. Yeah. You see these ads about call us, Now, Jonathan, if you call him on something, he will call you back.
Yeah. So the Crickershan Club was a place that you could do business because you knew everybody. Well,
you theoretically you didn't do business there, but there was, let's say, it would be something like you're having lunch with somebody, and they'd have tables, maybe with 10, 12 people, or singles. But you say it's just somebody you wanted to talk to later. Yeah, you're going to be around at 2 o'clock. Oh yeah, okay. You were there. It was a connection there with every level of everything. The mill owners were there. At one point, they had an alarm bell in the lobby that was hooked up to the fire department, because the bell would ring like the 3133 meant there was a fire and something down there. And there was a chart of what the bells were.
Yeah.
And the fire commissioner was a member, but all the mill owners knew what that bell was. So if there was a fire, they wanted to know, and that's the kind of a thing it was.
When did you start playing cards?
When?
When did your card game start?
Well, I started playing cribbage when I was a little boy. Yeah. My father, we played four-handed, Mother and Dad, and Dick and I. And I used to play once in a while. a couple of once in a while. Dad and Grant played every like, Monday night with two other guys, and sometimes when I was just in school, if the one of them couldn't make it, I'd go play with them. That was it was high level cribbage. I was playing high level cribbage a long time. In fact, I got a couple of the guys. One of the younger kids that he came into the club, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, but he sat down. He said, I've been learning how to play cribbage on the machine, on the computer. I said, oh, okay. Well, you want to sit down? Well, you sit down. And so, we normally play for, with like $1 or something. I said, well, let's play a few games and see how, So we played a few games. And he said, we got through. He said, I just realized that you are what they call the shark. The computer people have a level, this, and this, and the top level is the shark. I said, well, I just played a lot longer than you'll ever play, But, and because you can, just like anything else, you can make mistakes. Some sharks can make mistakes. You eat them, but but it was a compliment, And he still likes to play. He likes to beat me. He likes to play, but he is a paraplegic now. He had an accident, fell out of a tree stand, and when he hit the ground, it was all over. His legs were gone. He has developed to do anything he wants. He plays tennis, he swims, he fishes, he hunts all over the country. They have hunting for paraplegics. They have a guide with them. They take him places. He goes to private preserves. He has a place up in Maine on a lake. I used to go with him before he has his own truck now. He drives himself, but and he'd go out and we'd go out. He'd go out early, catch a couple of trout. We'd have trout for breakfast.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing.
He was nothing like. I'd never had like fresh trout for breakfast.
Yeah, right.
So, but I'm still wiggling when it hit the pan.